Welcome, lords and ladies, back to the realm. I am your humble host, the Goat King, and today we have a special guest, a longtime friend of the channel. Mark, would you like to introduce yourself and your channel?
Hello, travelers and tourists. My name is Mark, and I'm the local disaster tour guide. That's right, I'm a storyteller that's happy to be visiting the realm today.
And today in the realm, we are taking a look at three of the Ancestries from Pathfinder 2nd Edition's Howl of the Wild. This is a companion video to one on Mark's channel where we took a look at the awakened animal, the Athmaru, and the centaur. So at the end of this video, make sure to hop over and check that one out so you can get all of the ancestries from this book. I believe you have an ancestry to start us off with that ranges from Disney Princess to Horror of the Depths.
Yes, so the first ancestry we're going to be talking about today is the Merfolk ancestry. And this is the ancestry where I believe that my wife has been secretly bullying Paizo behind the scenes. Ever since Pathfinder 2nd Edition released, my wife has been demanding the opportunity to play a Merfolk, and I think she just finally twisted enough arms that Paizo agreed to create it. But if you have seen The Little Mermaid, you know exactly what to expect with this ancestry, though there are a few surprises along the way. The Merfolk are an aquatic ancestry with the upper torso of a humanoid and the lower torso of a fish, though it is worth noting that lower torso has some variability. We will get into that. And they are creatures that live in the sea, and I guess if I wanted to give you the quick, big picture of this ancestry, this is an ancestry where Paizo really went all in on the magical lore surrounding Merfolk. We'll get into this as we talk about the heritages, the feats, and stuff like that, but something just important to note right out of the gate is it's actually said of Merfolk society that it is extremely rare to see a merfolk that has no magical ability whatsoever. Magic is very common, it's very prevalent, it's something they're very comfortable using, and is a major part of merfolk society. And you'll see that in a lot of things like the ability to, use their voice to enchant people and different things like that. This is a natural ancestry that comes with a powerful connection to magical forces, and I think there are a lot of interesting storytelling options that flow from that.
You mentioned how these are specifically magically gifted merfolk. Now, it sounds to me like having a lower half that is a fish, or perhaps a squid or some such, would make it a little difficult to move on land. Can you tell us a little bit about their basic traits, their movement and such?
Yes, one of the things you will note in discussing the merfolk ancestry, they have a glorious land speed of 5 feet. And they do also come with a swim speed of 25 feet. So obviously they are much more effective in the water than out of the water. And by the way, there is a section at the start of How the Wild, page 9, that talks about some of the new rules with the new ancestries. If you want a full in-depth discussion of aquatic ancestries and what that means for your game, check that section out. A little bit of homework for you, but that will cover that a lot more in depth than we are here. Merfolk are slower on land. But stepping back and looking a little bit broader at the Merfolk, this is an uncommon ancestry with 8 base hit points. They're medium size. We already mentioned base land speed of 5 feet, base swim speed of 25 feet. They come with the suggested attribute boosts of dexterity, charisma, and free, with a suggested attribute flaw of Constitution. That one hurts me a little bit. Constitution is always hard to see. Their starting languages are Common and Thalassic, and much like the Athamaru in the previous video, they also have access to Aslanti as a possible bonus language, so if you want to have some lore fun, don't skip over that detail. And as for starting traits, they have the Merfolk, Humanoid, and Amphibious traits, And because they are amphibious, that means they can breathe air and water. However, the merfolk, like many other amphibious ancestries in Pathfinder 2e, they come with a flaw called hydration. What that means is your body requires water to function. You must return to an aquatic environment once every 24 hours, and if you don't, your body is going to begin to dry out. After 24 hours, you take a -1 penalty on fortitude saves, and after 48 hours, you actually begin to suffocate because your body desperately needs that water. So a merfolk is going to need to regularly return to the water or have some other way of just regularly refreshing their contact with water in order to effectively adventure on land. Now, that hydration flaw is a little bit rough. You see it on a lot of aquatic ancestries, but there is a positive side to this coin. As I mentioned, a lot of merfolk are innately magical, and they're all going to come with an ability called Aquatic Grace. What this means is when you roll a success on a saving throw against an effect that has the water trait, you get a critical success instead, representing the fact that your character is just very used to being in the water and exposed to water, and you know how to avoid those kinds of effects. Last thing worth noting, merfolk do have low light vision as well. So there's a lot of rules that go with them, but you can definitely see where they were trying to tie the merfolk to magical and underwater themes, and there's definitely some fun stuff in there.
Now, you mentioned their struggles with move speed and with hydration. Is there anything a merfolk character could do if they wanted to adventure in some place a little less hospitable? We know that air-breathing characters can get access to all kinds of tools to help them explore the depths of the ocean. Is there something to help a merfolk get around?
Yes, in this book, there is a new item called a supramarine wheelchair that is basically a water tank and a wheelchair combined into a single item, specifically designed for merfolk to be able to travel on land and kind of account for those penalties with hydration, land move speed. That item exists for that specific reason, and it even notes in that special section on aquatic characters I mentioned earlier, it recommends to storytellers, if you're going to have a merfolk in your game, consider allowing a player to start with one of those, just so you kind of skip over that hurdle just from the get-go.
It's good to know those players have options. Now, I can't help but notice the broad variety in the character art here. We've got a Little Mermaid style, something that looks much like a Maui type of character. And we have that thing on page 37. Does that represent something that's playable, or is that...
Yes, very much so. So moving into merfolk heritages, something that I didn't mention a moment ago because I was going to discuss it here. Merfolk respond to the sea much the way that humans respond to land, but in reverse. And what I mean by that is, merfolk live in what is, relative to the broader ocean, shallow waters. And merfolk look at the truly deep waters, like the Marianas Trench kind of locations. They look at that much the way you or I would look at a mountain. Yes, that's a place that we can go, but living there is very difficult to do. And as a result, the majority of merfolk don't actually live in the extremely deep locations in the ocean. However, the first merfolk heritage that we're going to talk about today is called the Abyssal Merfolk, and this represents the merfolk who do live in those incredible depths. They do venture to those locations and live in those locations that would be considered extreme environments for the typical merfolk. It specifically notes that abyssal merfolk often look more akin to a viperfish or an anglerfish, so when you see that creepy merfolk arc, that's what they're trying to portray. But the abyssal merfolk heritage, what it's going to give you, number one, it's going to give you dark vision, and then it's also going to give you immunity to the pressure from the incredible depths of the ocean. Yes, so when you see that absolutely creepy merfolk on page 37 of Howl of the Wild, that is a completely legitimate PC option. It is the Abyssal Merfolk Heritage. Speaking of the Maui merfolk that you mentioned earlier, the next merfolk heritage, this is actually probably my favorite one that they included. It kind of caught me off guard. It's called the Carcharodon merfolk, and this is the shark merfolk. Instead of a normal fish's tail, you have a shark tail, and much like a shark, you can smell blood. You gain scent as an imprecise sense out to a range of 30 feet. That's something you see with a lot of heritages and ancestries, but it goes a little bit further than that because when it comes to blood, your sense of smell is even better. Out of the water, you can smell blood out to a range of 120 feet, and in the water, you can smell blood out to a range of 500 feet. And I just have to say, it never occurred to me shark merfolk as an option, but as soon as I saw it, I was like, yes, that's something that needed to happen, and I just applaud Paizo. That was a very smart design decision.
It's a perfect fit.
The next heritage is called the Pelagic Merfolk. This is the merfolk of the open sea, and it's also worth noting that this is the merfolk that most directly encapsulates the idea of merfolk as a magical ancestry. It notes that water obeys your will, and you get an action called Shielding Wave. It takes a single action to do, and you raise a magical barrier of water that just twists around you. And until the start of your next turn, you gain resistance to acid and fire damage equal to half your level, and if you're in the water, it's equal to your full level. So this is literally an ancestry option that allows you to raise a magical water shield every round. Pretty cool.
I will mention, in reference to acid and fire damage, I believe as long as you're underwater, you already receive a degree of acid and fire resistance. I find this most useful when you're outside the water, because even though that resistance is higher when you're inside the water, it's really just higher to make up for the fact that you would have already had resistance to acid and fire in the water. Either way, it's a very cool ability.
Moving on to the next heritage, this is the Reef Merfolk, and this is the one where you live among schools of coral and among just kind of the diverse array of wildlife that lives under the sea. And it notes in particular with this one that because you are around so many of those creatures, you're used to a lot of the stinging creatures and a lot of the venomous creatures that live in that section of the ocean. And as a result, you gain poison resistance and essentially the if you know the strong-blooded dwarf that you get like benefits on saves versus poison, this merfolk gets those benefits as well. This is basically the merfolk that you've been stung so many times that you easily shrug off most poisons you encounter.
I'm realizing now that I totally forgot to bring up that the Athamaru should have had a feat for the spined one to get even just a once per day.
There are some poison feats for the Athamaru. If you watch the other video, we didn't talk about them. But in the original recording for this crossover, we kind of went on a huge tangent about the fact that there are no poison spines on the Athamaru. That is something Paizo overlooked, and we had to knock a point off.
Despite them having a heritage for spines as a natural attack. Ah, man, it's a missed opportunity.
Yeah, The heritages on the Athamaru, there were some missing options, sadly, but in any case, if you homebrew a poisonous Athamaru, the Reef Merfolk is going to be able to resist that attack. The final Merfolk heritage option is called the Sailfish Merfolk, and this is where your tail resembles a powerful sailfish, and this is the super jump version of the Merfolk. Your swim speed is going to increase to 30 feet, and when you attempt to high jump or long jump, you gain a +1 bonus to the athletics check, and you can use your swim for the stride before jumping rather than your normal land speed.
Now, you've mentioned the merfolk having a very strong connection to magic and sea-bending magical powers. What kind of representations of that do we have in the mechanics?
Well, a lot of the representation of that is going to actually show up in the Ancestry feats. You're going to see a lot of different options that play into the idea of merfolk as magical creatures. So, for example, there's some high level options like Siren Song, Tears of Pearls, Pummeling Whirlpool, and Doom to Sailors. All of those very obviously are playing into some of the magical lore that surrounds merfolk, and those are some very easy ways to portray that. There's also a feat that I both dread mentioning but also can't avoid mentioning called Healing Flesh. There are old mythological stories that the flesh of a merfolk can actually heal you, and there is a feat that represents that idea. If a merfolk is treating wounds on a creature, they can use a little bit of their blood in place of a healer's kit to actually take care of a wounded ally. And they've got rules for exactly how that works. It's kind of a creepy feat, but it's also a fun portrayal of merfolk as magical and some of the myths that have surrounded merfolk. So I thought that was a pretty interesting inclusion.
That is reminiscent of how the Colo, I believe they're called, has an option for left or right-handed being healing blood or harming blood.
Very reminiscent of that. All in all, I think the merfolk are. If the Athamaru were the sea dwarves, I think the merfolk can kind of be your sea elves in that they're just very magical. They've got a lot of fun ties to the magical elements of the world, and if you enjoy that style of character where magic is just a commonplace thing, I think the merfolk is a fantastic representation of that character concept.
I think I'm done with oceans for now. I mean, three ancestors. Well, one ancestry in this video. The companion video has two ancestries, which can be aquatic.
Do you have anything that's been, I don't know, underground for a while?
You know, I think I might. Just in time for all the cicadas dying off. We have an ancestry that follows a similar kind of swarm routine. The Surki.
So this is one of the new ancestries that where Paizo's just bringing something brand new to the ballgame. I am very interested in this ancestry. Tell me about them.
These are an insect-like ancestry native to the Darklands. Most of them live out their lives underground. They have a life cycle that generally starts with all of them hatching at the same time. They remain in a larva stage for between a decade and a century. Now, this hatching of their eggs generally coincides with what they call a generation dig. You see, the Surki consume magical energy, and from time to time, that means that they need to move their whole colony to some other place because they've depleted a lot of the magic where they currently are. So their whole colony will literally dig to a new location. Now, not all of their eggs hatch at the same time. Those that hatch outside the paradigm of the Generation Dig are usually raised communally, and very often they'll have difficulties feeding on magic like their other kin do. Surki have nodes in their shoulders that are their primary organ for absorbing magic. And oftentimes when one hatches early, it's because those nodes are in some way damaged or incomplete, and they often pair up with a specific organism that has co-evolved with their community, known as an ostelis, which binds permanently to their body, essentially replacing a damaged node. There's an archetype specifically built to represent this relationship. And we won't be going over it in this video, but it has a whole lot of stuff. Regardless, be them born during the Generation Dig or outside of it, when they reach maturity, adulthood, that's generally when they produce their own eggs, they reproduce parthenogenically. They only have one gender. It isn't specifically specified. I know in the real world, a lot of animals that can reproduce parthenogenically, it's an option that they use when they can't reproduce sexually. It's referred to as the primary mode for the Surkis. So I don't know if they actually do have a way of swapping genetics, or if they are completely an asexual species, which, fair enough. Given this disconnect, they tend to find sexual mate selection and also like monogamy very weird. I don't really understand it. And they typically don't select for companions based on looks. They tend to try to find companions with like opposing skills to fill in gaps, so that when they form their communities, they have everything represented.
Okay, so the Surki sound like a fun departure from the normal of Ancestries. You know, you're getting into that insectile space, and they play with themes that you normally don't get to see for an Ancestry. They also play into themes of adulthood because, like cicadas, we just scream for months on end. But I had to slip that joke in somewhere. But let's go ahead and talk about the mechanics of the Surki. If I actually want to build a Surki, what benefits is that going to give me?
Well, Surki are a rare ancestry because though they might hatch in great numbers all at the same time, they typically stay underground. Unlike our friends the cicadas, they typically keep to themselves a little bit, but occasionally one or two of them come to the surface and begin a life of adventure. They are medium creatures with 8 hit points and a 25-foot land speed. They're recommended to have a constitution bonus and a free bonus, and no recommended penalties for them. For languages, common, Surki, and bonus based on their intelligence modifier. They are humanoids.
Continuing that trend of we have no clue what that word means anymore.
I like I really don't know. We had a little tangent about this in the companion video on Mark's channel, but I'm not sure what humanoid really means in the Pathfinder 2nd Edition.
Howl of the Wild has
set.
made this a very questionable term.
I'll leave the main rant for the other video. You can make sure to check that out. They have dark vision and the ability Magiphage. They need no food or drink unless they are in a place that is particularly depleted of magic. As an example, the mana wastes are named here as the sort of place that they would need to actually eat and drink because they wouldn't be able to feed on magic. Which, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that means almost everywhere they're fine. I think the mana wastes are a pretty specific, special place because of them being depleted. They also all Surki spells and magic actions have the same tradition, matching whatever tradition it is that they fed on when in their larval stage.
So the Surki, it kind of sounds like similar to the Merfolk. Magic is very common and a very normal part of their society. Would you say that's true?
Absolutely. Less so in the performing it and more so in the consuming it, but it is important. It motivates their generation digs. I mean, it's a necessary part of a young Surki's diet.
All right, so there was a tradition in both of these videos of the Goat King unfortunately got stuck with the most complex ancestries from Howl of the Wild. And if Surki does not sound complicated enough yet, we're getting ready to get to the fun stuff. Tell me about Surki heritages and the interesting choices that come with that.
Well, Surki heritages make it necessary for me to mention another thing I hadn't mentioned before. There's a third stage in the Surki life cycle. You go from larva to adult, and then their evolved, metamorphized state. At their metamorphized state, they gain abilities they didn't have before. And because of that, each of their heritages references several abilities, evolution abilities, that are not accessible until later on in the game. You could say they just packed 2 extra ancestry feats into every heritage and then linked them to 1 feat to access them. You could say that. That's a bit reductionist, but it's accurate. It's accurate.
That is 100% what Paizo did here. They saved on the word count and page space.
Breaker Surkis have claws that do a d4 slashing damage in the brawling group, agile, finesse, unarmed, or versatile bludgeoning. The first evolution for Breaker Surkis, as a single action, allows them to modify their claw attack with some, I believe it's like an energy field, like a magic energy field. Their nodes in their shoulders project an energy field over their claws, making them 1d6 slashing. Still brawling, magical, raising, versatile force damage, in addition to versatile bludgeoning, finesse, and unarmed.
I missed Versatile Force. That is interesting.
That is interesting. Force cuts through a lot of stuff.
You know, originally I was looking at that evolution. I was like, okay, it's thematic. You get some energy, but I was missing like what's the real draw here? And then you said Versatile Force, and immediately I was like, oh, that's fun.
The other evolution they could choose changes this energy field from going to their claws to going to their feet, giving them energy claws on their feet, which they can use to reduce forced movement by half to a minimum of 5, and gives them a reaction called trench digging, where if you do force them to move and they use this reaction, all the area they moved through becomes difficult terrain.
So it's just kind of that classic scene in any kind of animated movie where someone gets pushed back and they're just like ripping up the ground as they go.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Bravo, Paizo. We appreciate the cinematics.
Next, we have the Elytron Surki. They take no fall damage from falling. Their first evolution gives them the ability to cast Fly on themselves once per day, and while they're affected by it, they shine like a torch. 20-foot bright light, 20-foot dim light.
Okay.
Their second evolution gives them an ability called Stridulating Song.
And it is amazing. I love this ability. All of you fans of Bad Goblin singing, brace yourselves.
2 actions, auditory, magical, and it's once per day. You circulate magic through your wings, causing them to vibrate at high speeds, such that their scraping produces disruptive sound. You focus the sound at one creature within 30 feet. who must succeed at a fortitude save against your class DC or spell DC, or become sickened 1 or sickened 2 on a critical failure, as the vibrations disrupt its inner equilibrium. You can sustain the effect for up to 1 minute. The creature cannot recover from the sickened condition as long as you continue your song and it can hear you. So, one chance to save against it. They don't get a save every round. They get one chance to save against it. And then you can just keep a penalty of -1 or -2 on them the whole combat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, you take a -1 to everything, because sickened, it's pretty punishing.
Honestly, that is my favorite option with the Surki, and I'm not going to spend too long talking about it because I would probably be fanboying for way too long. I love Stridulating Song. Thank you, Paizo, for putting that in. It is amazing.
Next, we have the Hardshell Surki. These have natural armor. Pretty standard natural armor kind of situation. It's a medium plate armor, +4 item bonus, dex cap of +1, -2 check penalty, -5 speed, 16 strength, comfort trait, your bog standard natural armor. Its evolutions come in. The first evolution, when an enemy hits you with a critical hit, you roll a DC 17 flat check to just turn it into a normal hit.
Mm-hmm. It's not always going to trigger, but when it does, that can be life-saving.
It's not once per day or anything, so I mean, even though crits only happen so often and it's a small chance of triggering, it's like a 20%. That's 1 in 5. It's still nice when you get to say, no, that is not a crit.
Mm-hmm.
Miss me with that. Their other evolution allows them to create a force field that works against spells and magic, but not force damage specifically. They get resistance 10 for 10 minutes, and they reduce the duration by 1 minute each time the field blocks damage.
And what about our final heritage?
Our final heritage is the Lantern Surki. If you saw that evolution for the Elytron Surki, which made them glow while they were flying, and you just thought the glowing was cool, Lantern Surki is going to be your choice. They gain a toggleable 20-foot bright, 20-foot dim, torch-like light that they can choose the color of. The evolutions are where this gets interesting, though. First evolution is Lantern Beam. Single action, 5d4 fire in a 30-foot line. Yeah, so I think there's a typo in this one. They say in this, a basic saving throw against your class or spell DC. They don't say which. I'm assuming it's reflex. If I'm your game master, I'm assuming it's reflex. I'm betting that just got missed. Once you use it, your lantern light goes out and you can't turn it on or use lantern beam again for 1d4 rounds. You know, if you just want to walk in and take the niche that dragons have, I guess, you could play a bug.
Mm-hmm.
But it is cool. The other evolution for the Lantern Surki is Lantern Strobe. This is 2 actions, and once per hour, you produce a 15-foot cone that requires a fortitude save against being dazzled and or blinded. In the companion video, one of the other Ancestries had an option that could produce concealment effects. And I mentioned how strongly my opinion of concealment effects is. And this is even better. You just throw out a 15-foot cone and just blind a bunch of people.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. That's great.
So I think the takeaway from the Surki, they strike me very much like the automatons from Guns and Gears. Like, you get a basic version that you can upgrade throughout the course of your character progression, And there's even a Surki feat. Yeah, at 5th level it's called secondary adaptation, where if you're like, maybe I want breaker claws and lantern glow, like the Surki can just churn all kinds of ancestry options into modifying their body and their natural abilities, and it's very, very reminiscent of the automaton, and I think it's a very cool design space.
You can absolutely be like a debuff machine at high levels if you take the Elytron for the stridulating song and then the lantern for the lantern strobe and just throw those out and keep all your enemies sick and confused.
Okay, so we have talked about the heritages, and I already pointed out one of the Surki feats, but I was wondering, what are some of your favorite ancestry feats for the Surki?
Well, they've got a great many very cool ancestry feats. I feel it'd be wrong for me not to mention Grand Metamorphosis. That's a ninth level feat that lets you actually take one of the evolutions for your heritage. You can take that feat multiple times, so that by the time you're like 17th level, you could have three of them if you'd also taken secondary adaptation. Like if you're just really into those evolutions. Perhaps more interesting, though, in my opinion, as they're like the capstone 17th level feat, unlimited pluripotency. Within all Surkis is the capacity to be whatever they need to be, and you can tap into that capacity even now. When you sleep, you can choose to enter a pupa state. You sleep so deeply in your pupa that you can't be woken up by loud noises around you, and you lose the benefits of one of your Surki heritages overnight. When you emerge and make your daily preparations, you can select a different Surki heritage to replace it. If you had one or more evolutions for that heritage, you can choose a different evolution for your new heritage.
Yes, this feat is amazing.
Did you really like the lantern, but you're going up a mountain today and you might want to be able to fly? Yeah, why not?
So, this is, and I'll try not to stay on this tangent too long because we've got one more ancestry to cover, but I just want to say something that Paizo occasionally does that I really appreciate. The ancestry design in Pathfinder 2e is amazing, and frequently I'm frustrated because there's so many things I want to use that I will never get to use. But you will occasionally see options like this, unlimited pluripotency, where it's just like, hey, next game session, I'm using an entirely new option. And so things that allow you to switch out mechanics and try different things from session to session, that is such a good thing to bake into a game. I absolutely appreciate it, and I just want to call it out because when Paizo does stuff like this, it is truly something I appreciate.
It does burn a hole in your character sheet, though.
That's
It is
fair.
cool.
It's cool. You just you might keep them on note cards, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that being the Surki completed, there is one last ancestry that we're going to cover today, and I believe you might have a very specific connection to this ancestry. I seem to remember you wanting this ancestry very much to have come out much earlier.
Yes, the final ancestry we're going to talk about today is the Minotaur, and the Minotaur is one of my favorite creatures in tabletop RPGs, and I love Minotaurs and Minotaur style ancestries in games. It's one of my earliest characters in a D&D 3.0 game was a Minotaur that I remember it running around and playing that, and I had a ton of fun. I had a ton of fun with that. So, just Minotaur has always been a favorite of mine, and I was very, very excited when Paizo dropped that they were going to be including the Minotaur in Howl of the Wild. from a lore perspective, their story is very interesting because the Minotaurs really have some beef with divinity in the setting. And yes, that was an intentional pun a second ago. You're welcome. The story of where Minotaurs come from, there was a craftsperson that received a vision from this divinity of like this temple that they were supposed to create. And in this vision, they kept seeing bulls over and over again. They kept seeing the image of a bull. And so they got this message from the divinity. They're like, okay, I need to make this for them. And so they go and they start making this temple and they start carving all kinds of images of bulls all over the place. And a few decades later, when they're finally done and they've got this place prepared, the divinity shows up, and come to find out, the divinity actually hated bulls and was offended to see bulls all over their new temple. And so this turned into the divinity ended up cursing the craftsman to take the form of this hated image, and that was the first Minotaur, and the Minotaur ancestry kind of developed from there. So it's very interesting. The Minotaurs very much know that the divine is real in their world, and also aren't on good terms with it. And I think there's some good role playing hooks there. There's some good story potential. And in terms of culture that pulls from that story, one of the big things on Minotaurs is they are very much craftsmen. They like to build, they like to design. Architecture, especially, is very important to Minotaurs. And they note that there are often more buildings than there are Minotaurs in a Minotaur settlement, because Minotaurs are often just designing new spaces and making new buildings because that's kind of a hobby for them. They're similar to dwarves in the like creative crafting aspect, but where dwarves are often manufacturing tools or weapons or armor, Minotaurs are more designing the space around them, and I think that's a cool distinction. But yes, I absolutely love the take on Minotaur lore and mythology, and I'm very, very excited that Paizo have added Minotaur to the game. It's one of my favorites, and there's a lot of fun stuff here.
I was not aware of their backstory, but it does make sense that they'd like building and architecture, given their founding member was something of an architect. Given they like building so much, do they have stats that are beneficial to that goal?
Well, they definitely hit the gym. When we talk about their attribute boosts, they definitely hit the gym. Minotaur is an uncommon ancestry, 10 base hit points, large size, speed 25 feet, and for their suggested attribute boosts, you have strength, constitution, and a free boost with a suggested flaw of charisma. And this is one of those things, I haven't been able to check all of the ancestry, so I might be missing one. I believe this is the first ancestry in Pathfinder 2e where both of the boosts, or both of the suggested boosts, are physical. Usually it's a physical and a mental, and then a free boost. I think the Minotaur is the first one where you've got two physical for free boost. Could be wrong about that, but it's definitely something you don't normally see. So the Minotaur is definitely an ancestry that is being pushed in a more physical direction. And like one of the pictures of the Minotaur is him hauling a giant boulder, just lifting it up over his shoulder. The Minotaur did not skip the gym. They have been lifting. They've got some strength that they bring to them. Some of their other statistics, languages, they start with Common and Jotun. And in terms of interesting bonus languages, because I've been pointing that a lot out in the series, Cyclops is one of the options for the Minotaur. So they already speak Jotun, which is the language of giants, and then they can speak the Cyclops as well. For traits, you have Beast, Humanoid, and Minotaur. They have dark vision, and then probably one of the most obvious traits, they have horns, which are an unarmed attack, 1d8 piercing damage, in the brawling group with the unarmed trait. So they can stab things with their horns.
What you just described to me is an absolute unit. A unit with an eye for architecture. Are they all likewise built, or is there some variance in what Minotaurs are like?
There is some variance in their heritages. Not necessarily all Minotaurs are going to be large size. You're going to see some options for medium sized Minotaurs, but diving into the heritages, one of the first ones is the Ghost Bull Minotaur, and it says, your fur is as pale as death, possibly for some connection that you or your family has to the afterlife. So, you've got a spooky version of the Minotaur. It says you can cast Know the Way as an occult innate spell at will, and it auto heightens like cantrips normally do. And then you also get a +1 circumstance bonus against spells or effects that would cause the confused condition. This seems to play into a few different things. Minotaurs is associated with the underworld. Minotaurs, the Know the Way, they've got the ability to find their way through mazes. It kind of plays into that aspect of the lore. The next heritage is called the Glacier Cavern Minotaur, and this is for the Minotaur that's from way up in the mountains that lives on the glaciers, and you get cold resistance equal to half your level, and you treat environmental cold effects as 1 step less severe. So that's a style of heritage we see a lot, but basically that is the Minotaur that is resistant to the cold. And then, to answer your question from a moment ago, there is the Little Horn Minotaur. The Minotaur, if you will. We had to mispronounce at least one of the ancestries in this video after the trouble we had last video. The Little Horn Minotaur is, instead of large size, it's medium size. It does downgrade the damage of your horns from 1d8 to 1d6, but it also gives your horns the agile trait. So, you still have the strength and con bonuses, you've still got all the other normal stuff. You are still tough and built, your frame's just a bit smaller. The next heritage is called the Roaming Minotaur, and the Roaming Minotaur is going to build around the Terrain Expertise feat. If you've ever seen Terrain Expertise, you know that when you pick that feat, you have to pick, it's one of 3 different types of terrain. It's rubble, underbrush, and I think it's snow. If I got that wrong, let me know in the comments. But what the Roaming Minotaur is going to get is they're going to automatically be trained in survival. They're going to get the Terrain Expertise skill feat, pick one of the 3 options for Terrain Expertise, and they automatically ignore difficult terrain that is associated with their Terrain Expertise. So this is the survival-oriented, good at moving through their environment version of the Minotaur. Pretty useful. I'm going to skip my favorite Minotaur and save it for last. And I'm going to go to the Stalker Minotaur. And I want to point out on the Stalker Minotaur, think about the name, the Stalker Minotaur is not a medium-sized Minotaur. This is a large Minotaur. Despite your heavy frame, you walk on shaggy hooves that muffle your footfalls, allowing you to surprise your prey. You become trained in stealth and gain the Terrain Stalker's skill feat, except you must choose rubble and can sneak no more than 10 feet instead of the normal 5 feet. So, this is another take on the classic Minotaur hunting you through a maze kind of character, but this is essentially the stealth Minotaur. You may remember I mentioned earlier that one of my first characters was a Minotaur. We actually jokingly referred to that build as the Stealth Cow, because I built that Minotaur to sneak up on people and terrify people while sneaking up on them. And I just absolutely appreciate that Paizo took my character concept from 15 years ago and stuck it in their game. Thank you, Paizo. I appreciate that. Large, does not necessarily mean loud. So that is the Stalker Minotaur. But as much fun as that is, it's not my favorite. Paizo surprised me with one. And my favorite version of the Minotaur is the Slab Soul Minotaur. You have a deep connection with stone and walls, and it allows you to conjure massive slabs of granite and make them collapse on your foes. You get a special activity called Raise Slabs. It's a 2-action activity, usable once per day. Thick slabs of stone rise around you before tilting over. They deal 1d6 bludgeoning damage to all adjacent creatures, and there's a basic reflex save against it. And on a critical failure, creatures that take damage are also knocked prone, and the damage scales as you level up. You just raise giant blocks of stone and crush the people next to you. That is so cinematic. That is so cool. I love it.
I mean, I did not expect to see Minotaurs conjuring blocks of marble to crush their foes, but it seems my expectations have been thoroughly squashed.
You know, it's not something I thought of, but Paizo's done that a few times with the Ancestries in this book. They added things that you don't initially think of, but when you hear it, you're like, yeah, that actually fits, and that's really cool. And the Slab Soul Minotaur is a fantastic example of that. Just I don't Toph from Avatar: The Last Airbender raise up giant blocks of stone and crush people with them.
Guess you have to make a Minotaur kineticist now. You know, given they surprised us with their heritages, is there anything else surprising about this ancestry?
Well, they have a healthy collection of feats. I I didn't do a count, so I don't know if they have the most ancestry feat options in this book, but I think they are definitely a contender. You're going to see a lot of different feat options, and you've got your typical stuff, your Minotaur lore, your Minotaur weapon familiarity. You see stuff like that normally. And then you're going to get some stuff that's very much things that you could expect, things that are going to help you. There's like Eye for Masonry that, makes you familiar with architecture. There's crafting oriented feats. But there's also a lot of feats that play into some of the other Minotaur stories. Like, for example, alarming disappearance. If you successfully hide from a creature that could previously see you, you can give them the frightened condition.
I mean, a large Minotaur just disappearing. That would seem quite frightening, I must say.
Where did he go? Where did he go? They also have, at 9th level, they have a feat called Goring Charge, which imitates that classic Minotaur, like just running into battle and ramming people with their head. They've got that as an option. However, there are 2 feats that every barbarian player ever has wanted. One of them is called Friendly Nudge, and the other one is called Friendly Fling. And yes, they do what you think they do. They assist your party in moving where they need to go. Oh, and by the way, Friendly Fling specifically notes you are flinging your allies with your horns. So just keep that mental image in mind while you are casually tossing your allies to other spaces on the battlefield.
You might want to avoid friendly flinging your wizard to safety, because when they get there, well, you were flinging them with your horns. They might have a few more holes in them than the warranty would normally allow.
But yes, the Minotaur has a ton of feats, and like I've said before, I'm not going to dig into every single one of them because there's just a ton of options here. But there is a lot of very fun stuff packed into this book. Paizo does a good job playing around with the mythology of the Minotaur, like it did the other ancestries in this book, and you definitely have some options to explore in this book.
And with that, I think we're coming to a close on this video. Now, before I do my outro, I do want to mention again, and it will be linked in the description. Go check out the companion video where we cover the awakened animal, the Athmaru, and the centaur. And also, before I go, Mark, is there anything you'd like to say?
I am Mark. I'm the local disaster tour guide. You can check out my channel here on YouTube, where I cover all kinds of TTRPG topics. I mostly talk about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I try to dip my toe into Starfinder as well, but I'm always looking to meet new people and chat about fun, nerdy stuff. So, Goat King, thank you so much for doing this crossover, giving me a chance to come on your channel. This has been an incredibly fun conversation. This is round 2, reduced in length for the sake of our viewers, but it has been a fun conversation.
These 2 videos were intended to be one video, but at about halfway through it, at the hour and a half mark, an hour and a half in recording, we realized it was probably a bit too much for one video.
So yes, Goat King, thank you so much. This has been an absolutely enjoyable conversation. And to everybody else, join in the conversation as well. Let us know the stuff you like, and let us know the things that stood out to you. So,
especially with new Ancestries, it's always fun to see ideas for what people want to play, what people want to do with these cool new options. But I have been your host, the Go King, and as always, travel with loyal companions.
have a great day.